the man who was born a slave and became the greatest philosopher in history. He had nothing, not his body, not his freedom, not his family, and yet he was the freest man who ever lived. He owned nothing, not his name, not his body, not his freedom. He owned nothing, and he became the most influential philosopher who ever lived. Around 50 AD, in a small city in what is now Turkey, a child was born into slavery. His name was Epictetus, a Greek word that means simply acquired, a possession, a thing, not a person with rights or future or dignity, a thing that belonged to whoever paid for it. He would go on to teach philosophy to senators, generals, and future emperors. His words would shape Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful ruler in the world. His teachings would become the foundation of modern cognitive psychology, and his school opened in poverty. In middle age with a broken leg and nothing to his name would produce some of the greatest thinkers in Roman history. This is not an inspirational story. It is something much more important than that. It is proof documented, historical, undeniable proof that the circumstances you were born into have no final say over what you are capable of becoming, that the mind, properly trained, is the one thing in the universe that cannot be owned by anyone but its owner. This is the story of Epictetus, and by the end of it you will never look at your own circumstances the same way again. Let me tell you what we actually know about Epictetus, because his story is remarkable not despite its gaps but because of what we can document. And what we can document is extraordinary. 10 AD. Birth. Born into slavery. Hierapolis, Phrygia. Born in Hierapolis, modern-day Pamukkale in Turkey. His mother was a slave. He was therefore by Roman law a slave from the moment of his birth. His name was given to him by his owners, not his family. Epictetus means acquired. He was property before he was a person. 65 AD. Rome. Slave to Epaphroditus, secretary to Nero. He was taken to Rome and sold to a man named Epaphroditus, the personal secretary to Emperor Nero. Epaphroditus was powerful, cruel, and known for his brutality toward his slaves. Epictetus lived in this household during one of the most volatile periods in Roman imperial history, surrounded by political murder, paranoia, and absolute power at its most corrupt. 68 AD. The leg. His master broke his leg. His response changed history, the most documented and most remarkable moment of his early life. Epaphroditus, reportedly to test or to punish, began twisting Epictetus's leg. What happened next is why his story is still told 2,000 years later. 93 AD. Freedom. Freed begins teaching philosophy. After Nero's death, and through circumstances that are not fully documented, Epictetus was freed. He was middle-aged. He had a broken leg that had healed incorrectly and would cause him pain for the rest of his life. He had no money, no connections, no property. He moved to Rome and began teaching Stoic philosophy in the streets. 8 AD. Nicopolis. Founds his school. Senators travel across the empire to attend. Expelled from Rome with all other philosophers by Emperor Domitian, Epictetus moved to Nicopolis in Greece and founded his school. It became the most celebrated philosophical school in the Roman world. Senators, military commanders, and members of the imperial family traveled hundreds of miles to sit at the feet of the freed slave with the broken leg. He had nothing, not his body, not his freedom, not his family, and yet he was the freest man who ever lived. Epaphroditus began twisting Epictetus's leg, slowly, deliberately, as a demonstration of power, of the absolute dominion a master had over the body of a slave. There are different accounts of why. A test, a punishment, a display of cruelty for its own sake. What all accounts agree on is what happened next. Epictetus said calmly, almost conversationally, "You're going to break it." Epaphroditus continued, and the bone snapped. Epictetus looked at his master and said with the same calm voice, "Did I not tell you that you were going to break it?" Read that again. His leg is broken. He is a slave. He has no power, no recourse, no protection, and he is calmly pointing out to his tormentor, in the moment of the act, that the prediction was correct. This was not bravado. This was not performance for an audience. This was the Stoic philosophy lived at its most extreme, most real, most tested point. Epictetus had already decided, long before that moment, that his body was not him, that his pain was not his identity, that what happened to his leg was not in his control and therefore not his concern. What was in his control, his response, his reasoning, His character remained entirely his, unbroken, untouched, untouchable. That distinction between what is in our control and what is not became the foundation of everything he would later teach. It was not a theory he arrived at in a comfortable study. It was a truth he discovered with his leg being snapped by a man who owned him. That is where the Enchiridion comes from, not from comfort, from that room. When Epictetus opened his school in Nicopolis, he had nothing that the world recognized as valuable. No imperial patronage, no family connections, no wealth, no physical strength. His leg had healed badly, and he walked with a limp for the rest of his life. He lived simply. Some accounts suggest he slept on a straw mat and owned almost nothing beyond a lamp. And yet, from across the Roman Empire, the most powerful empire the world had seen, they came to him. Senators who governed provinces, military commanders who led armies, young men from the wealthiest families in Rome, and eventually, the teachings of a freed slave with a broken leg reached a young Marcus Aurelius, who would become emperor and carry those teachings into the highest office in the known world. Arrian, one of Epictetus's students, wrote down his teacher's words without permission, horrified that they might be lost. Those notes became the Discourses and the Enchiridion, the complete works of a man who never intended to publish anything, who taught in a small school in a provincial Greek city, who owned almost nothing, whose words are still in print, still studied, still changing lives 2,000 years after he spoke them. Think about what that means. The most powerful man in the world, Marcus Aurelius, emperor of Rome, shaped his entire philosophy of leadership and life on the teachings of a former slave, a man who had owned nothing, a man whose body had been broken by a master who considered him property. The student became emperor. The teacher had been a slave. And the teacher's wisdom outlasted the empire. Here are the 3 core teachings of Epictetus, the ones that came directly from his life, not just his thinking. These are not abstract philosophy. These are survival tools forged in the hardest possible circumstances. The dichotomy of control, the only thing that is yours. This is the foundation of everything Epictetus taught when he arrived at it, not through reasoning but through experience. Some things are in our control. Some things are not in our control. Our thoughts, our responses, our values, our effort, our character, not in our control. Our body, our reputation, our property, what other people do, what the world gives us or takes away. Epictetus lost everything that falls in the second category: his freedom, his body's integrity, his ability to move without pain, and he discovered that none of it, not a single thing in that list, had any power over the first category. His mind remained his, always, completely, and that, he taught, was the only thing worth fighting for. Modern cognitive behavioral therapy, the most evidence-based form of psychological treatment in the world, is built directly on this distinction. Albert Ellis, who developed CBT, credited Epictetus explicitly, a freed slave's survival. Philosophy became the foundation of modern mental health treatment. That is the scale of what he discovered in that room with Epaphroditus. Make the best use of what is in your power, and take the rest as it happens. You are not your circumstances. You are your response. Epictetus taught that it is not events that disturb us. It is our judgments about events. The broken leg did not disturb him. His judgment about the broken leg, which was that it was merely a thing happening to his body, not to him, is what kept him free while physically enslaved. This sounds simple. It is not. It requires years of daily practice to build the gap between what happens to you and how you respond. Epictetus called this the training of the will, the daily, deliberate practice of choosing your response rather than reacting automatically. Every time you pause before reacting, every time you choose your interpretation of an event rather than accepting the first one that arrives. That is Epictetus's teaching in practice. That is the freed slave's gift to you. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Freedom is internal. It cannot be given or taken. Epictetus was freed by external circumstances, the death of Nero, the changing of political winds, but he had been free long before that. The freedom he had built inside himself, in the years of slavery, in the room with Epaphroditus, in every moment of choosing his response over his reaction, that freedom was already complete before any legal document confirmed it. And this is perhaps his most radical and most important teaching. For the world we live in now, you are waiting for something external to free you. more money, a better job, a different relationship, a different body, a different past. Epictetus had none of those things and was freer than any of the powerful men who owned or studied him, because he understood, at the most visceral possible level, that freedom is not a circumstance. It is a practice. It is something you build, daily, in the way you choose to meet the world. No man is free who is not master of himself. Epictetus died around 135 AD in Nicopolis. He had spent his final years living simply, teaching, writing nothing himself, letting his students record what he said. He adopted a child whose parents could not afford to raise it. He lived with a woman, possibly a partner, possibly a housekeeper, and in a small house. He owned almost nothing, and he left behind a body of work that shaped an emperor, founded a psychological discipline, and is still being read by human beings trying to understand how to live. 2,000 years after, a slave in Hierapolis decided that his circumstances would not determine his character. You were not born into slavery. You have not had your leg broken by someone who owned you. Whatever your circumstances, and some of you, watching this, are carrying things that are genuinely heavy. They are not as complete, not as absolute, not as total as what Epictetus faced, and he built something that outlasted an empire. What are you building? What is the thing inside you that your circumstances cannot touch? That is your enchiridion. That is your work. That is the only thing worth working on. The enchiridion is linked in the description. It is one of the shortest books in philosophy. You can read it in an afternoon. Read it. It will not feel like ancient philosophy. It will feel like someone who knows exactly what you are going through wrote it this morning. Because the problems Epictetus solved are the same ones you are solving, just without the broken leg. Subscribe if this story reached you. Drop a comment. What is the one thing in your life right now that is genuinely in your control, that you haven't taken full ownership of yet? I read every single one. See you in the next one.